Hey, I'm Warren Haynes, and this is the Blues Podcast.
Hello, and what a great guest for you here on this episode. I'm very excited to say, almost in the same room as myself, virtually in the same room as myself, as it were, I have the one and only, the great guitarist, songwriter, the fantastic man that is Warren Haynes. Hey, Warren, how you doing, man?
Doing okay. How are you doing?
I'm all right, man. Yeah, I'm good. It's almost like we're in the same room, isn't it? It's kind of weird, but...
Yeah, it is today's reality. So,
Yeah, it is for sure, isn't it? How are you bearing up in the whole, of this pandemic thing? Are you managing to do any gigs at all at the moment, or any playing?
I haven't. I've done a few things where I just video me doing something from home or in a studio environment or something. But I haven't performed, and I don't really have any plans to perform anytime soon. There's some interesting offers that are starting to come in, but I want to step back and see where it all goes before I commit to any of that stuff. I'm intrigued with some of these like drive-in movie type concepts that people are doing, but I'm just not ready to be the canary in a coal mine just yet.
I've seen a few pictures online about the drive-in gigs and all that sort of thing, and what the mosh pit might look like. It just cars piled in on top of each other, kind of thing. I can't quite see that working, but it would be.
It's an interesting attempt at a solution, but
I mean, how would you get reaction from the audience? Would they like toot their horns and flash their lights or something, or kind of
Maybe, maybe so, because I saw a thing on the news about a church in Detroit where they set it up like a movie theater, and the preacher was on the screen.
Yeah.
And when it was time for everybody to say hallelujah, they honked their horns, So I don't know. I have no idea. But I know people are ready for live music, but, I don't think we can rush this whole thing. We have to step back and see where it all goes.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I want to talk to you about live albums later on, but I know you've done lots of live albums. I mean, that could be a really interesting live album, couldn't it?
Yeah. Complete with the horns honking and
live from the car park, Warren Haynes. Well, there's something to think about. Anyway, you could be the first person to do a live gig in a car park on record.
Maybe. You never know.
Something to aspire to. Right, I think we should really get into it now and get going. Man, I've been looking over your career sheet, as it were, and I say sheet, I mean it's like sheets, reams and reams and reams and pages of stuff that you've done. It's unbelievable how much you've achieved. But I want to start right back at the beginning, if that's okay, and I want to talk to you about when you were growing up. And what was the first thing that made you think, I want to be a musician?
Well, excuse me. The first sound that I remember, like, exciting me and making the hair stand up on my arms was black gospel music coming over the radio in North Carolina, where I grew up. I was probably 5 or 6 at that time. The first memory I have of a song, I think, was Sounds of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel.
Right, yeah.
I still have this almost visual memory of hearing it in a car in the driveway of the house where I grew up. But I had 2 older brothers, and still do, and they have amazing taste in music. So I was turned on to a lot of great music when I was really, really young. They had, the Beatles and the Stones, but even prior to that, James Brown, Wilson Pickett, Otis Redding, the Four Tops, the Temptations, Sam and Dave, Aretha Franklin. It was a house full of soul music records when I was growing up. At a time when you only had 12 records, they were the best of, the best of, the best of, And so we had Stevie Wonder and all this stuff. But I still remember the James Brown 45s, the singles. that we had. And James Brown was my first hero. One day my brother brought home a Sly and the Family Stone record, and that kind of opened the floodgates. The next thing you know, it was Jimi Hendrix and Cream and Johnny Winter and stuff like that that would eventually make me want to play guitar.
Yeah. Just speaking of that, going back to what you said about having those 12 records, and that's completely different from what's going on now these days, isn't it? I mean, now these days you just get on a streaming service and everything is at your fingertips. I mean, back then, how did you decide? You probably got a few bucks as allowance money or something. How do you decide? Right, I'm going to spend this on. I'm going to go to the record shop. I'm going to go buy something. How would you deal with that?
Well, I think I remember the singles being 77 cents, which is not completely different than what it is now, I guess.
Yeah.
But you got 2 songs for 77 cents. I would defer to my brothers. And the first time I ever bought an actual LP or several LPs with my own money that I could say were actually mine, I asked my oldest brother what I should buy. And he, at that time, recommended Jethro Tull Aqualung and Alice Cooper Killer. Right. Those were the first 2 LPs that I owned myself.
Is that because he wanted to hear them, but he couldn't afford to buy them as well? So he'd like,
yeah, probably. Yeah, he didn't own them, and he wanted to listen to them. But he was also telling me, I think you'll enjoy this, because I was, I don't know if I had started playing guitar yet at that point, but I was getting intrigued with the whole concept of rock music, which was a whole different thing than soul music.
Yeah.
And it was very visual. You would read the album covers and the liner notes and the lyrics and look at all the pictures and stuff. And but I was lucky that both of my brothers had tremendous taste. So, my other brother had all the Traffic records and Joe Cocker and Bob Dylan, and my oldest brother had Howlin' Wolf and Elmore James, and also had Sonny Rollins and Coltrane and Miles Davis. So I really loved B.B. King at an early age, even though before I started playing guitar, I loved his voice. But once I discovered rock music, I really got hooked on that. But I would go and read what all my heroes liked, and of course they all listened to all the blues giants. So I would start discovering that music,
Yeah. That's interesting because I hear a lot of people say that, and the same thing happened to me actually. Like, you hear some music and you think, wow, that's fantastic. And then after a bit of digging, you realize it's like cover versions and it goes back to like Howlin' Wolf or Little Walter or someone like that. What do you think those earlier, older records had that the new guys didn't pick up on?
The blues records, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, it was just, it was authentic, where it wasn't being filtered through an interpretation, where, when all these white rock bands and singers and guitar players started interpreting that music, it was being filtered through their personalities and their technique and their voices, and oddly enough, or I guess it makes total sense, all my favorite white singers at that time were white singers that were trying to sound like they're black heroes. Whether it was Steve Winwood or Greg Allman or Paul Rogers or Van Morrison or Lowell George, all these people that I really loved as rock singers, Johnny Winter, they were all emulating the black blues people that I would have to go back and rediscover. Yeah. And it was cool to hear the original versions sometimes after hearing the rock versions, because sometimes they were very, very close to the bone. Sometimes they were completely different.
Yeah. Which you prefer, do you think? Do you like it when like the guys just take a song and make it completely different, or do you like that sort of homage to the original material?
Well, I like it when you put your own stamp on it, but I also like it when you show people that you're not just visiting something temporarily. It's something that you understand and have studied. So when you hear someone singing a Howlin' Wolf song, it's nice to know that it's not their first time hearing Howlin' Wolf,
Yeah.
And so it's a combination of both of those. I think people ask me sometimes what criteria I use to choose a cover, and I always say either a song that I wish I had written, or a song that I always wanted to sing, or a song that I feel like I can do a completely different way and still honor the original version.
Yeah, yeah. It's a good way of doing it, I think. Yeah. I want to keep talking about the early days for a minute and talk guitars a little bit, because these days you're playing quite often the Gibson, the 58 Les Paul reissue. Everybody knows you're kind of associated with. But do you remember the first guitar that you got? What was it?
Well, my first guitar was a Norma, Norma.
I never heard of
guitar and a Norma amp. And it's funny, I was just yesterday with Joe Bonamassa, and he asked me the same question. He's one of the few people that I've ever met that knows what a Norma guitar is. Most of us don't have any idea what that would be. $49 and $59 respectively, the guitar and the amp.
Wow.
My dad bought them in the local hardware store, which, that's where you want to get your musical equipment.
Yeah.
But it didn't take long. My dad he kept an eye on me, and he could tell that I wasn't giving up on this new fad or trend or whatever it was. So a year later, if I was still into it, he would trade something in and get me a little better version.
Yeah.
So I guess about a year or two later, I got a Lyle copy of a Gibson SG. And then about a year after that, I got an actual Gibson SG. So the first decent guitar I had was a Gibson SG.
Nice. I mean, most kids, when they're starting off and they say, hey, I want to play guitar, or their parents want them to play a guitar, they're given an acoustic guitar kind of thing and see how you get on with that. Well, you went straight into the deep end with a guitar and an amp, eh?
Well, my oldest brother had an acoustic guitar, and I played it more than he did. So my dad bought me an electric guitar.
So you could already see that you were serious.
Yeah. My brother lost interest pretty quickly. Whereas
is that when he saw you playing? He just thought, I can't.
Who knows? But he definitely could see that I was more interested in it. He also dabbled on sax and harmonica, but never really took it seriously.
Right.
Where to me it became kind of an obsession.
So what kind of age were you when you first started getting into playing the guitar?
I was 11 when I played his guitar, and I think I got my guitar for my 12th birthday. I think I was 14 when I got my first kind of nice guitar.
Right, yeah.
But, back then, and I guess any time, your parents want to see if you're going to maintain interest. And if not, there's no reason to keep upgrading you. I came from a very working class family. My dad worked long hours to make sure that I had even a $49 guitar. But he knew that I was passionate about it.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Yeah, to have your parents back you up like that is fantastic. The same with me. My mum and dad were brilliant, supporting my career and all that sort of thing. And yeah, if it wasn't for their belief, we wouldn't be here, right?
Yeah, because I knew a lot of friends that were good musicians that could have been really good musicians, but were discouraged by their family.
Yeah.
And wound up giving it up, So it's nice if you get encouragement.
So when you sort of made the decision that you wanted to be a full-time rock star, was your dad right behind you on that one, was he?
Well, he was very supportive because my dad, he still sings. He was a singer. He had a beautiful voice when I was growing up. He sang like Hank Williams.
Oh, wow.
But he never sang professionally. He never sang in public, but he always had just this great voice. And I think the fact that he never pursued it may have had something to do with him wanting to be more encouraging for me, because he grew up on a farm. They had no money. He was working hard from the time he was 15.
Yeah.
So wanting me to have more than that, I think, was a big part of it. When I decided that I wanted to not go to college and go on the road with a band instead, I can't say he was happy, but he gave me his blessing.
Yeah. You're very lucky. Very lucky man.
Yeah.
Just thinking back to that first guitar and when you got it, do you remember what the first song you played on it was?
You know, and like everybody else, for even in later decades, somehow either Louie Louie or Smoke on the Water, you know, I don't know, but one of those, I think I even played it with my thumbs, you know, boom, 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 like, or ba 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 ba. Those two I remember noodling around with, you know, but I can't remember much beyond that, really. Maybe some Jimmy Reed type riff that I stole from some white band copying it, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Looking back on it now, which of those guys, the old school blues guys, is there a favourite for you now? I know you said earlier you like B.B. King the way he sung, but as a guitarist now, looking back, who really sort of influences you?
I think Albert King is probably my favorite blues guitarist. And I've always said that I think Albert is the blues guitarist that influenced rock music more than anybody else.
Yeah.
If you just look at his influence on Hendrix alone, that's enormous. But he also influenced Clapton and Duane Allman and eventually people like Stevie Ray Vaughan that really paid homage to Albert. With all the other blues guitar players, including B.B., who I love, you could trace their steps. You could see where it came from.
Yeah.
With B.B., you heard T-Bone Walker, you heard Lonnie Johnson. But with Albert, nobody played like that before Albert King. It's like he arrived on a spaceship playing like that, because I've never heard any indication of where he might have gotten that style from.
Yeah.
And it was so wild and so intense. And I loved Freddie King.
Yeah.
I love Freddie's voice as much or more than his guitar playing.
It's an amazing voice, isn't it? Yeah.
You know, I only had one guitar teacher growing up, and I took lessons from him for about 3 months. It was this blues guitar player in North Carolina named Andy Hunter. And he eventually pulled me aside and said, look, all of my students don't even practice between lessons. They show up the next week not having picked up their guitar. He said, I can see that you're obsessed with it. I think you should just stop taking lessons and teach yourself like I did. And he was being honest with me, which took money out of his pocket, which was very bizarre. But the one thing that I remember he told me, if you only study the three kings, meaning Freddie, B.B., and Albert, you could spend your life studying that.
Yeah.
And I took that to heart.
And what a great thing just to spend your life listening to the Three Kings. I mean, I could do that, definitely, yeah.
You know, and there's a wealth of stuff there between the three of them. You know, not that there are not dozens and dozens of similarly important guitar players, but those three guys pretty much covered the gamut, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So blues was a big part of your early guitar influence, but it was also that sort of dawn of rock, wasn't it? I mean, we just mentioned Hendrix. I mean, he was a big influence on your playing, right? Yeah.
Hendrix and Johnny Winter and Eric Clapton were the first three people that I really discovered. You know, my brothers had Live Cream Volume 2, which was a record that I listened to a lot. all the Hendrix stuff. I think the first Hendrix thing I heard was Smash Hits before I heard the previous stuff. And the Johnny Winter stuff, I think the first thing I heard was Second Winter. But it was such an impressionable time that I just spent countless hours listening to all that stuff. And when you're that young, it makes such a huge impression, you know, not only in what the guitar is capable of, but also the way it should sound. Like those were three distinctly different sounds, but they all had certain things in common. Yeah. And what I would later pick up on was that all those guys were looking for their voice on their instrument. You know, with Jimmy, the Strat was his voice, you know. With Johnny Winter, the Firebird mostly, although, you know, you see him here and there playing Les Paul or playing something different, and the same with Hendrix and obviously with Clapton. But they each created such a distinctive difference, you know. I would later figure out that what I was looking to do was what B.B. King had done and what Bonnie Raitt had done, which is where your voice and your guitar kind of sound the same.
Right, yeah.
One represents the other, you know. Yeah. I loved Peter Green's sound, but I didn't discover Green until later. You know, sometimes in America we were late picking up, like and Kossoff the same way. I didn't discover Kossoff till later than these other guys. I did discover Jeff Beck at an early age and was instantly a huge fan of his. And when I heard the Allman Brothers for the first time, I was knocked out. And by the time everyone in my town had live at Fillmore East, that was something we studied intently, you know, and the guitar sounds on that record are incredible.
That must have kind of blown your mind a little bit. I mean, you know, you're young and you get this Allman Brothers record and you listen to it and you take it apart and kind of thing, and you know, and then you end up in the band years later. I mean, did you ever sort of sit there and think, shit, how did this happen?
Yeah, you know, it was quite a shock, or not a shock. I guess it was an overwhelming life change, but thankfully I had a little initiation in the way that, you know, I played in Dickie Betts's band for almost 3 years prior to joining the Allman Brothers. So that gave he and I 2 or 3 years to kind of hone in our relationship together. It wasn't like one day I woke up in the Allman Brothers, which would have been completely insane. But it was a shock in the way that every time someone would ask them about the band reforming, they always said it would never happen. So the whole time that I was in Dickie's band, that's the way I looked at it, is there will never be an Allman Brothers reunion. Yeah. And that's the way I looked at it until they called me and said, we're reforming and we want you to join. I was like, wow, okay. But I was a huge fan, and I always said that if there were a band that I grew up listening to that I would want to join, the Allman Brothers would be at the top of the list.
Yeah. So you were with those guys until, what was it? When was it? 97 they split up. Again, I mean, was that when the band split up again? Was that like just a real kick?
Well,
just got here and now it's, you know, it's finishing again.
Yeah, but they were notorious for splitting up. They had a little 3-year pattern. They would stay together for 3 years and break up, 3 years, break up. And so, you know, when I joined the band in '89, they had been broken up for 9 years at that point. And the last 2 albums that they had done, they weren't very proud of. And so we reformed the band based on this Dreams box set and the 20th anniversary. So it was really just intended to be a one-time thing. Put a band together, go do this 20th anniversary tour and move on. But it was much more successful than anybody imagined, I think. And especially from a musical standpoint, the chemistry of that newly reformed band with the three new guys was better than any of us had imagined. And we all felt it and knew that there was a potential if we kept it together.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you, I mean, you did see it, I was going to say, did you see it lasting really that long, as long as it went, or you just think this is going to be a flash in the pan and I'm just glad I've done it?
Yeah. You know, I was just starting to make plans to make my first solo record, which I was already planning when I joined Dickie's band. And then when I finished 3 years with his band, I thought, okay, now I'm gonna make my solo record. Then I got the call to join the Allman Brothers. I thought, well, there's no way I can turn that down. So I postponed my solo record again. But then after 1 year, I thought, okay, now I've done that, and I'll get on with my solo career. But the fact that they wanted to keep it going was a pleasant surprise for everyone, I think. And it was nice to see that the band was getting along, not only just playing well together, but everybody was getting along.
Yeah.
And also, I think a really important aspect of that whole thing is that philosophically, the band had made the decision to go back to the beginning, revisit what the band did in 69, 70, 71. And if we can get back to that, then the sky's the limit. But the first thing we have to do is get back to that.
How much influence did you have on that? Did you have a lot of input into saying, come on, right, let's take it back to the old days, or was it kind of?
Yeah, you know, Dickie and I were very close at that time, and we spent a lot of time together, and we discussed a lot of things, and he trusted my instincts, and he and Greg both were very open to the input coming from the new members. And I think the Allman Brothers is one of those bands that it can't really be the new guys and the old guys, and the new guys are up front, and or the old guys are up front, and the new guys are in the back. It's got to be a real band, at least on stage and behind the scenes. Yeah. So the fact that we had this chemistry was something we could all see, and so everybody was open to whatever we needed to do to make it better. So they trusted me from an arrangement standpoint, as a songwriter, as a singer, and it's partially because I'd been writing with Dickie, and then all of a sudden Greg recorded one of my songs just before the Bullets Fly for his solo record. So suddenly I was writing for both camps, which was a really good thing for me. And it also kind of allowed them to gain trust in me, you know, because they didn't always communicate so well together. They did for a short period of time, and then, of course, a few years later, that started dissipating again, you know? Yeah,
so you were kind of that bridge almost.
Yeah, unfortunately, sometimes I could be the one in the middle. You know, Dickie would come to me and say, hey, I can't talk to Greg. Will you talk to him about this? And then Greg would come to me and say, hey, man, I can't talk to Dickie. Will you talk to him about this? And I was just like,
like being back at school.
I really don't want that job.
I mean, that must have been amazing, you know, writing songs for Greg, though. I mean, it's, again, another dream come true, right?
Yeah, you know, I was such a fan, and his voice and his songs inspired me so much through the years. I used to joke around with him and tell him, you know, most what I learned from him, I learned before I even met him, you know. And I met him in 1981. I think we knew each other that long. But where I grew up in North Carolina, there was a connection with the Allman Brothers music, especially among musicians, but among music lovers in general. All of a sudden, we had this band that represented us and looked like us and sounded like all the different things that we listened to combined. You know, because they were combining soul music and blues and jazz and country music and rock music and psychedelic music and all this stuff. And they created what people called Southern rock, but they never liked that term, you know.
Right, yeah.
Greg used to joke around I remember one time he and I were doing an interview together, and somebody said something about Southern rock, and he said, well, first off, I hate the term Southern rock. He said, rock music came from the South, so it's a bit redundant. He's like, it's kind of like saying rock.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that later, actually, but yeah, you've kind of covered that pretty much. Because I mean, a lot of people call you a government mule, a southern rock jam band. I mean, how do you feel about that phrase?
Well, I'm from the South. Alan Woody was from the South, and we were a jam band in the way that improvisation was a huge part of our sound. And that we played a different show, a different set list night after night after night. But we were kind of the bastard child of the jam band scene. We were definitely the black sheep. We were the heaviest of all the bands that were categorized as jam bands. We always said we had one foot in the rock world and one foot in the jam world. But the thing that I loved about the jam band scene was that it was all about live music, and it was all about every show being different. And the Allman Brothers kind of adopted that philosophy pretty early on in our reunion as well. You know, the first couple of years after the band reformed, we kind of stuck to the standard playlist. But after about 3 years, we decided, you know, let's just play as many different songs as we can, make the shows different every night, you know, which was a Grateful Dead thing. But it was also a thing that jazz musicians did, a thing that blues musicians did, and a thing that bluegrass musicians used to do. It's just in the rock world, it wasn't so common, and especially in the pop world, you know. But Government Mule, we were never really comfortable with the Southern rock term for a few reasons. The same as the Allman Brothers, that nobody wants to be categorized, for one.
Yeah.
And since rock music started in the South, it was a bit redundant. But also, our influences were like Cream and Hendrix and Mountain and Led Zeppelin and The Who and Free. So, you know, people don't think about that sort of thing when they label you. But, you know, it's interesting when you think back. I mean, Leonard Skinner were hugely influenced by Free. I think if there was a band that influenced Skinner more than the rest, it would be Free. And so Free started Southern rock in their own way too.
Yeah, that's an interesting theory. Yeah. I mean, journalists, music journalists, they absolutely love to pigeonhole music, don't they? They love to say this is that and that is that, and that does drive me crazy, because I've succumbed to that sort of treatment before as well. But I mean, how would you describe your music now? If aliens came down and said, Warren, we picked up your tunes on the planet Mars, what is it?
I would say it's a long description, because I would say it's rock music that's very improvisational and influenced by blues and jazz and soul music. But, you know, I think any great band that we grew up listening to kind of found their voice by combining some odd influences. It was never just obvious and easy. You know, there were always some wild card influences that made people have a uniqueness. You know, even I remember B.B. King saying that every great musician has at least one influence that you wouldn't expect. And the person that was interviewing him said, well, who is yours? And he said, Django Reinhardt. And it's like, wow. The fact that B.B. King listened to Django Reinhardt is incredible, but it makes sense as well, because why would he not?
I could totally see that. Yeah. I totally get that. Talking about styles and other thing, I mean, I said at the beginning, you've done so much work. You've recorded, 23 albums with Government Mule, right? And 8 albums with the Allman Brothers, lots of different live albums. You've done lots of guesting with people. You've covered like so many styles and influences. Do you think, is there any influence or style that you just wouldn't touch and go, you know what, no, I don't want to do that?
Well, I mean, I see no reason to say do opera or
That's where I was going with this. Yeah,
you know. And again, it's not to belittle any amazing musical genre or any school, but there are certain things that I think I would shy away from. And at this point, most every genre of music that I'm influenced by, I've already kind of touched on at least to a certain extent. You know.
yeah,
I've never made a real blues record. And so at some point, I think I'd still like to do that. But the blues has been such a part of almost everything I've ever done. But somehow I've just never done a traditional type blues record. You know?
Kind of blues is in everything, though, really, isn't it? When you really nail it
Absolutely.
down, it's the root of everything, really.
Yeah. And you know, in some ways, you have to dig pretty deep to hear that, but it's there, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some people don't talk about the influences on black gospel music was what gave birth to blues, but there were not just African influences, but there were like European influences that all kind of melded together too. There are a lot of people that talk about Scottish music having an influence on that, you know, because nothing is born in a vacuum. Somebody enters your environment that's exposed to something nobody else heard, and all of a sudden that's an element, and it's part of things from that day forward, you know. And a lot of the greatest music ever made was made because somebody blended something together that had never been blended before.
Yeah, I hear that. So we're not going to hear Government Mule's version of Flight of the Valkyries anytime soon or anything, right? There's not going to be a special album.
No, and if so, it would be the aforementioned reinterpreting. Yeah, we would do it the way Frank Zappa would do it. You know?
See, I think a lot of people are going to want to hear that. You're going to have to do it now, Warren.
Well, including me. I would want to hear Zappa do it. I just don't want to hear myself do it.
So I'd love to hear that. That'd be fantastic, I think. Again, I'm going back to the list of all your achievements and the things you've done, which is an amazing list. And just want to talk about some of the people you've worked with. People like, well, we spoke about Joe Bonamassa earlier, and Peter Frampton, Walter Trout, lovely Walter Trout, of course. William Shatner was on the list that I noticed. I mean, what's that about? I've missed that one. I've got to confess.
Well, you know, and I still haven't met him. I did get a nice letter from him thanking me for being on his album. Our management received an offer for me to be part of this William Shatner record. And at first it was like in Spinal Tap, is this a joke? But we looked at the offer and, it has all these amazing guitar players on it. I think Richie Blackmore was on there, maybe Brian May, Steve Howe. I forget all these people that I love, and I'm gonna totally mess up the list, but there were all these amazing guitar players on it. And it's like, well, if they're down, then I'm down too. So they asked me to do the Golden Earring song, Twilight Zone. And so Shatner is going, help, I'm slipping into the Twilight Zone. And, you know, basically talk singing, you know. And so I went into the studio to overdub. Absolutely no guidance. Nobody had any guidance on what I was supposed to do. And there was all this open space, like 3 minutes or something in the middle of the song where they wanted me to play. And I'm like, you want me to fill up all this, you know? So I had to come up with some way of making it hopefully interesting, you know. But it was fun, and the company was great. And so I was happy to do it.
Hey, when Shatner calls, you pick up the phone, right?
yeah, for the next round, for volume 2.
I mean, you've had lots of guests on your records as well. I mean, you've had some amazing guests as well. I mean, I'm going to read out. I'm name dropping today because you're your list of people you work with is fantastic. But people like Elvis Costello and Dr. John, Ben Harper, you know, so many people you've had. The list is really, and I'm not going to go through it all, but some great guests you've had working on your records, Government Mule and everything. Is there anyone that you've never just managed to get, you know, just if only I could just get such and such, who would it be?
Well, when we did the Deep End sessions, we were trying to get as many of Alan Woody's heroes to play bass. They wound up being 25 bass players.
Yeah.
You know, we had Chris Squire, we had John Entwistle, we had Jack Bruce. And of course, all those guys are past now. I had spoken to John Paul Jones about doing something, and we were trying to make it happen. He was actually going to do a string arrangement for one of the songs, which I was very excited about. But his trip to the States got canceled, and we wound up not being able to do it and agreeing to do something in the future, which we did. And I really enjoyed playing with John. We were also trying to get Paul McCartney for the Deep End sessions. And I wrote a letter appealing. I remember the letter that I wrote said, I'm not inviting you as a Beatle and as one of the most influential people on music. I'm inviting you as one of the most influential bass players in music. And in the same way, we would want Jaco Pastorius or James Jamerson if they were still alive. Paul McCartney is that important to bass playing, and that's what this record is all about. And we got a response that was very nice, but obviously it would have been amazing to have him be part of it. I've been so lucky, you know. I mean, I've worked with so many people that I grew up loving and being influenced by. And, you know, in the blues world alone, I mean, playing with John Lee Hooker or Willie Dixon or Albert Collins, those were all huge things to me. You know, but the list is pretty overwhelming in the way that I'm very humbled by the amount of people I have been able to work with. I've never worked with Mark Knopfler or Jimmy Page or Neil Young. Those are all people that I love, that I would happily do something with. But, you know, these things happen organically. It's never something that, you know, you try to make happen. It usually happens where you meet somewhere in an environment and it turns into something, you know?
Yeah.
And so I'm open to whatever happens, but again, I'm just very grateful for the situations I've had.
Yeah, you say that about organically and things happening. I mean, that very thing happened to me with Paul McCartney. I was doing a gig that he was at, and he really liked the band I was playing with at the time. And a couple of weeks later, I got a phone call saying, would you like to come and record an album with Paul McCartney? And I'm like, I don't know. I think, you know, I wash my hair. I'll have to think about it, you know. Shit, yeah. I was like, yeah, of course, yeah. Actually, in the end, it never came off. So it was one of those carrots that was dangled in front of us, and, you know, we got all excited about it. And I think I ended up playing in the States when it was being recorded anyway. But between me and you, I heard the album when it came out, and I thought it wasn't very good. So I was kind of like happy that I dodged that bullet, like, you know. I was like, but don't tell no one that.
All right. Well, whether it's between you and me or not is up to you, because this,
yeah.
I won't tell anybody.
Oh, I think I've just blown that one, haven't I? Oh, that's it.
Cut that section out. Yeah.
He's not going to send me Christmas cards anymore. Sorry, Paul. I hope you're enjoying this little chat that we're having with Warren here on the Blues Podcast. As you can see, Warren's got so many fantastic stories, and I'm enjoying chatting with Warren so much. I think we're going to make a bumper podcast out of this one, and we're going to have a part 2 because there's so much to go over still. So look out for part 2 of this podcast. It's going to be coming up very, very soon, and you can hear the rest of all the exciting stuff that Warren's got to say here on the Blues Podcast. So if you've enjoyed this, why not like and subscribe to the Blues Podcast right now? All right?